This is Tim from Contentstack, and in this video I'm going to show you the shortest way possible with the least amount of code to connect to Contentstack from Next 15 with the app directory. And I've opted to add live preview and visual building in it as well, because as Contentstack we feel those are core features. Before you dive into how this all works, we're going to show you all the code and how Contentstack looks. There are a few other videos in this series that might give you a bit of context. One of the more important ones is how to use our CLI to seed a stack with content to be able to actually look at the data that we're connecting to today. So that one would be quite handy. And also, because I mentioned we're using live preview and visual building, there is a video that explains how actually that works under the hood. Like, how do we connect from Contentstack to your website and how do we live update all the data that you're editing, right? With that out of the way, let's dive into this. And so in this video, what I want to talk about is, okay, 1, how do you connect to your stack? 2, how do you then query your stack? And then 3, how do I set up this live preview so it all kind of works in a lovely way, right? So this is our stack. And so if you not know yet, all these stacks are projects in Contentstack, right? And so in this stack, I just created a super simple content type, just because we didn't want this stuff to be super opinionated, because for your work, you will have your own opinion and your own context. So this is the simplest we can get it. And you take what you need, put it in your own project, right? So title, URL, which we use to query, description, image, rich text, and then there's modular blocks. And so modular blocks are groups of fields you can just add anywhere without making it a reference. So you can actually have multiple blocks attached to this page, but you can also have global fields that are modular blocks, right? So I have a global block I can now add to any data model that I have, and without making it a reference. And so if you look at how that looks here, I set the title as / it's just a homepage. There's an image, some description. You can use it for your OG tags, for example, some rich text, and here are my blocks. And so I said live preview, right? And so this code is being set up to also be able to live preview. Let me just make that slightly bigger for you here. And so the cool thing about that basic setup is, like, when I now click on edit here in my title, it goes here and I can just add title. And it just updates that in my code. And so we'll also discuss how that works. And then as the cherry on top, that same base setup to do this also works for this, right? So this is proper visual building where you can type inline, or I can change my images inline, for example. And this helps kind of a lot, right? And I have, like, let's say I have these blocks here. I want to move this one down. You just click the arrow and it happens. And so this is just an extra loveliness on top that you get with these only 50-60 lines of code that I'm about to show you. Okay, so let's not save this. And let's go into the code. So this is Next 15 app directory. You can see at the time of recording, we're at 15.1.7. I'm sure this will update soon. And then once we have the time, we'll update this demo as well. So we use the Contentstack Delivery SDK and the Live Preview utilities. And so these are two separated packages for the sole reason of the fact everything we build is agnostic, right? So you can use Live Preview on its own without an SDK and just use the API directly, or you can use only the SDK and no Live Preview, whatever you want. And so if you want to know how those things really connect, watch that other video I mentioned before. All right, so we just have a normal page like you have in lots of Next projects. I did not add components at the moment because I didn't need to add any opinion to this. It's just a one-pager essentially. And so before we dive in how this all works, because there's a little bit of live preview stuff going on, I made a lib folder with Contentstack in it. And for the people with keen eyes, you see there's also a TypeScript file here. And so I didn't make this by hand because I didn't want to. What you can actually do is go to your data model here. And then on the sidebar, we have a developer app here. You can actually go to the marketplace and just install this. And now I can say, generate my types, please. So it looks at all this. It knows exactly what this means. You copy paste it, you put it in your types, done. No need to do it yourself. If you wanted to use the CLI, you can also use the tsgen from our CLI. Link in the documentation below. So now that that's out of the way, Also, by the way, you don't have to use the TypeScript. Even if you use our TypeScript delivery SDK, you don't have to have TypeScript in your own project. So you can just omit that if you want to. So we make a stack variable, and that stack variable connects to your Contentstack stack. And so when you read the documentation, you'll see you need the API key. I have a delivery token. I use a specific environment. I have a region because Contentstack can live on different regions as the CMS platform even. You can even be on Azure. And like the defaults are AWS. In Europe or US, you can have Azure, you have Google Cloud. There's a bunch of different setups here. So if you do this for work, make sure you validate with your colleagues where your Contentstack instance lives. And so there's this live preview property here. I won't go in too deeply, but basically here you can say, well, enable it. And the reason we enable it here and also have a live preview SDK is the moment live preview is turned on, this delivery SDK will get its content from a draft API endpoint just for live preview. If it's turned off, it will just get it from the CDN. So that's an important distinction to make. And so let's skip this one for a second because this sets up live preview. We now have the stack, right? Then I made a function to get a page specifically from that stack. So we already know our content type is page. That's literally, this is our content type. And then inside all the pages, we query where the URL is actually slash. And you will see that here. I actually get the page slash. Well, that's obviously this one, right? Because there's a slash for the URL. So we're querying that entry. And then, you know, so this is essentially a query for get me all the types for page and filter it to where the slash or the URL is slash and then find it, please. And here is where we type it. You don't have to do that per se, but it's kind of nice to have. And so this is a little bit later. I'll talk about this in a sec, because what this actually does is it adds some metadata to your output so you can do visual building, click and point to know, hey, is there enough metadata on this title? When I click on it, that Contentstack knows, hey, you're editing the title. Come back to that in a sec. So now when we go to our page here, we see we use client. If you want to do live preview in client-side editing mode, that's the most smooth that we have. You can use client so it runs in the server and the client, and we can do some fun stuff. Like when you actually edit an item or an entry in Contentstack, it fires this function, and then it requeries the draft API endpoint and sets the page state. So this is why this is slightly more complex than normal, because normal, what you could do if you didn't have all this stuff, you would literally just type that and you have your page and you're up and running. However, now we have live preview here. And so what this thing is actually doing is it sets a state for the page. And there's a function called getContent that queries that page and sets the state. And we do this because on useEffects, so this is in the client side, on document ready, we make a connection to Contentstack, and Contentstack gives me an on entry change event through the iframe post message. And so every time you change an entry, it fires the getContent function and it gets the content, sets the page, and now your page has all the data that it needs to render. And so the moment you open up live preview, this function is fired immediately. So it will get you your initial data. And so the rest of this is very basic JSX or TSX stuff in this case, right? If I have a page title, let me render a header 1 with a page title inside of it. If I don't have it, I go to null. And so this is quite default, right? We have that for our description. We do it with a next image. We do it for our rich text. And we do it for our blocks. We have multiple blocks, so we loop over them and then we render them. And so for the people looking at what the heck is all this, Tim? Why do you have all that extra stuff here? Well, this is where we come back to this one function that I just kind of skipped, right? So when we have live preview true, what we can do for the entry that you get back from your stack query, you can add editable tags. And editable tags are essentially metadata that we add on top of your results from the SDK. And with that, we know what you're clicking when you edit it, right? So when we actually have a look at live preview, Here, when I click on this, it now knows I'm editing the title. And even when I open the form, it knows it's the title. Or when I click on this one, it knows it's a description. So there's a connection here. And so the moment you add this function to whatever entry you get back, you get this $sign here. And I think what we could do is just have a little look at log the page. Or you know what? Let's log the page title. So we'll just go like this. Just do this. So when we actually go to our front end, so this being React, it refreshes a few times in local host mode. It's all good. So this is the homepage title, right? And so let's now do the same thing. Oh, and add that dollar in between. So now what it does, it gives you that title and then it gives you a data property, data CSLP, Contentstack Live Preview. And it has page type, the ID of the thing we're currently editing, then the language, and then whatever that field was that you're querying. And so this thing, when you look at this, it actually does the following. Let's zoom that in once more. So we have the header one with our title inside, right? And then there's this data CSLP, page, UID, language, title. When we look at our description, it does the same thing, but for description. When we look at our image, it does the same thing, but for the image URL. And the same thing for our rich text, right? And so because this data tag is on there, the system knows I can click on this and do stuff. And so this can still work without all these data tags because you can just, edit something up here and it will still update. You don't need the data tags, but it's kind of nice if I can click on it, right? And so this was a super fast, maybe 50 to 60 lines of code to connect to Contentstack, including Live Preview and Visual Builder. And so with this, your base setup is ready to rock. Thank you for watching and happy coding. Cheers.